what I wanted to do is talk about, why I did TAM, what I did after TAM, and then tell you a little bit about some of the things I've done in journalism, and a little bit about Bloomberg, and then leave plenty of time for questions afterwards. Open season on the questions. I'm not going to talk about U.S. elections or Brexit or things in my speech, but I'm happy to do it afterwards, or rock and roll for that matter. But I'm happy to chat about any of that afterwards if you are curious. So, as Matilda said, I did my undergrad at University of Georgia. I did philosophy and German, and I really enjoyed both those subjects. I went to Germany after that to study philosophy and get much better at German, and I wanted to do TAM because it was a different field. I could do something different. I was interested in political science anyway, and loved that I could study in places where I wanted to speak foreign languages. But beyond that, I don't think I really knew. I had no idea what I wanted to do as a career. I only started to think about journalism my fall semester in Chapel Hill, and that was just because I thought, there's not going to be a future in philosophy. And I didn't want to go to law school. That's what a lot of philosophy students do. So I just thought, well, I like traveling places. I like writing about it. Maybe journalism is something I should look into. And it was that simple. I mean, I didn't have a bigger, deeper plan beyond that. But anyway, I finished in Berlin in 2002 and declared myself a journalist, and picked up freelance stuff wherever I could. I interned at Reuters. I interned at National Public Radio. I wrote articles for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, for the Straits Times in Singapore, for the Boston Globe, just whatever, wherever I could get a little, a gig, I would take it. And eventually I had enough clips with my name on it, clips being stories that you've written, that I could credibly apply for a job at Bloomberg. So that took a while. That took a good year before I got there. But that's, don't be, it may sound dispiriting, but it really wasn't that bad. Berlin is a great place to be hanging out and surviving and trying to start your career. Anyway, I had to move to Frankfurt to cover economics. And I had no formal skills in economics. I don't think I've taken an economics class since I was in the 10th grade. But TAM, the TAM classes certainly helped with having the background and understanding the bigger stories behind it. And it was a great job in Frankfurt. My job was to follow central bankers all over the continent, pretty much, and go to their speeches, report what they say. I spent a lot of time in airports, but got to do cool things as well. Once I had to go to Mexico City on a whim. They told me on Friday, you got to go to a conference there. I went to St. Petersburg in Russia. Spent several good weekends in Ljubljana in Slovenia. But after a few years living in airports and stuff, it was a bit tedious. I came to London to be closer to the center of the Bloomberg universe, but also because my girlfriend, now my wife, is British and had moved back to London to take a job. So I was following her. She, by the way, was a Euromasters student. We met in Berlin on the program. Anyway, I've been in the UK since 2006. I spent 2 years covering economics here. And then I started covering the energy industry in 2010. I sat on the markets desk for 2 years, curating a product for traders that puts news stories on a scroll in front of them, kind of like Twitter. But it was on the Bloomberg. And then I moved back to economics 3.5 years ago, I guess. And yeah, that's how it all happened. I mean, it's been a great ride. You know, the job has been fun. I get to travel lots of places. They put me on TV. You know, Bloomberg famously has offices with lots of food and giant fish tanks. So all those perks are really fantastic. Just a bit about what financial journalism is all about. Journalism is usually divided up into beats. There's a subject matter, and each one of these beats will have a meta story, a big sort of background thing that if you were writing a book, that would be the story you're telling, but you're not as a journalist. You just have that in the background, and every new thing that comes up fits into this bigger story. So I wanted to just talk about sort of that bigger story behind economics and the energy industry, and why they're both so interesting. We'll start with economics. One of the cool things about economics is that it has changed a lot in the 15 years that that I've been writing about it. What's basically happened is after the Cold War, you've had a lot of rapid change, and the story of economics since then has pretty much been about central banks trying to keep the economy on an even keel. Central banks, I don't know how much background y'all have, but central banks are basically there to set interest rates. This is what they charge commercial banks to borrow money from the central bank, and they all have to keep deposits at the central bank. But the idea is the central bank can set interest rates that will keep inflation at a steady rate, and then that steady inflation rate encourages the economy to grow, and then with the steady economic growth, you will maximize employment and achieve the greatest amount of prosperity for the greatest number, and all of that. Now, before the Cold War ended, the fight everyone was fighting in central banking and elsewhere was inflation being too fast and too high. But once the Cold War ended, there were several things that happened that created these huge disinflationary effects. So the opening up of Eastern Europe and China to the world economy made everything cheaper. And that basically meant that inflation was low and thus interest rates were low. Now, that things went really well for 15 years or so until the financial crisis, and then the fact that interest rates were so low and investment banking had been deregulated, we got the global financial crisis, and especially since then, the big problem has been that inflation has been too low, and central banks have struggled to get prices to rise faster. If you want to know more about the reasons behind the financial crisis, I really recommend you read Michael Lewis. First read Liar's Poker, just because it's hilarious. It's about investment banking in the 80s and how it got big. And also The Big Short. Even, you can watch the movie for that if you like it. It's the summarized version. But yeah, investment banking is a fascinating subject in and of itself. But I don't necessarily recommend you go for a career in it. Anyway, since the financial crisis, inflation being too low, so central banks have had to get creative. They started buying bonds to stimulate demand in the economy and get prices to go up, but that's not as effective as cutting interest rates. And since we've gotten to COVID, that was another huge shock, and now we really have a problem. Interest rates are as low as they can possibly go, and it's not clear what central banks can do that will be effective. Yeah, the reason why slow inflation or deflation is bad, by the way, and it's not obvious to everyone. Falling prices are bad for the economy as a whole because it discourages people from buying stuff. The idea is that if your money's going to be worth more in a month or two, or even a day or two. If the price of whatever you're trying to get is going to go down, you have every incentive to wait. And that means you buy less stuff in general, and that means that there's less demand for stuff in the economy, and ultimately fewer people have jobs. So that's why deflation is bad, and that's, I mean, it's the opposite reason. It's a similar reason actually for why inflation is bad. If prices are going up too high, you also have an incentive to not buy stuff that you don't want, and again, that depresses overall demand in the economy. Yeah, so now the onus is really on governments to come up with something to stimulate the economy, to get prices back up and help employment. And that's the basic story of economics today. If governments and central banks get things right, that'll be great. You can keep on going on and not really pay attention to economics as something on the front page, but you get it wrong and you've got another Great Recession or a Great Depression as things have gone so horribly wrong a few times in the past. Now, alongside all that, you have the energy industry, which I covered for 4 years. And you'll always read about gas prices at the pump, and you hear about oil prices going up and down. What generally has happened is in the 1990s, after the Cold War, and decades after OPEC first really turned the screws on the global oil supply, oil prices were very cheap. They were about $10 a barrel. They got as low as $10 a barrel, which is a huge problem for oil companies because that meant it wasn't worth their while to dig any oil out of the ground. It's always been easy for Saudi Arabia to do it. Saudi Arabia is a country that's basically a huge oil field covered with a little bit of sand on top. You could stick a straw in the sand in Saudi Arabia and oil would pop out. It's pretty amazing. Anyway, but as China entered the global economy, it started to require a lot of energy. Their energy demands went way up. And suddenly, demand was rising faster than supply because oil companies for years had sort of put their tools down because it wasn't really necessary to have this stuff. And oil prices started going up and up. And if you remember in the 2000s, oil prices were getting really expensive. And they got up as high, I think it was 2006, as high as $150 a barrel, which is also a problem for consumers because it makes keeping the lights on very expensive. But it also allowed basically other players to start providing oil. In particular, the US again started to produce oil, which it hadn't really been doing for decades with the shale oil revolution. I don't know how much background you guys have in this, but they basically figured out that you can grind up rocks underground and release oil that way, rather than just sticking a pipe in there and having it flow up. To get more out of it, you can grind the rocks up and then create oil. Anyway, it's a bit more expensive, but it all made sense when oil prices were expensive. And when oil prices were up, it also kept the Russian economy going for a long time. Russia has huge energy resources. And it also encouraged risky exploration for oil. So deep sea drilling, for example, or going into the Arctic and trying to drill for oil there. So I started covering oil in 2010, and after a few months, BP, who was the main company I was covering, they're one of two enormous British oil companies, the other one being Shell, got into what you might call a spot of bother in the Gulf of Mexico, where they had a huge oil spill and one of their rigs had a blew up. Anyway, it was a problem for the Gulf of Mexico and for BP, and it was a fascinating thing to cover, especially as I didn't know that much about the energy industry when I started, but was forced to learn quickly. And with Bloomberg, of course, our clients are people who are buying and selling shares or bonds. So a lot of my reporting was on what every new event meant for the company's balance sheet, how it was going to affect profit and loss, and of course how much the government fines were going to be, and where they would all be. But of course, you also had to learn a lot about engineering and how to stop an oil spill. I talked to an external PR for BP a few years after it was all done. And I was like, why was your PR strategy so bad? When you had the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, didn't you have a plan for this? Couldn't you have handled this better? And he said, no, we had a 5-point plan. I was like, well, what happened? And he said, we never got past point 1, which was stop the spill. And that's what ruined BP's PR from that. Anyway, since then, we've had, as I mentioned before, all these economic crises. Oil demand has gone back down. Oil prices are now at about $40 a barrel, and which is just neither high nor low. I mean, it's relatively low, I guess. Part of that is because OPEC got fed up with competing with U.S. shale oil producers and decided to really turn on the taps and flood the market with oil. And that's not going to change anytime soon. If you know anyone who works in the oil industry now in the States, they're probably worried about their job in the short term, and that's for good reason. It's not obvious when it will make economic sense to start pulling oil out of the ground in the U.S. again. One other small thing about energy I wanted to mention is that if prices do go up and you start having to pay a lot to fill up your tank, don't blame the gas station. One thing that the BP CEO used to tell us at press conferences was that if you go fill up your tank at a gas station and then you go into the shop and when you pay, you buy a cup of coffee, the gas station makes more money on that one cup of coffee and profit than it does on your entire tank of fuel. It's really just a grocery store that happens to have a gasoline pump to get you in there in the front. But it was, I mean, that was a cool thing to do. I visited an oil rig in the North Sea on that beat. I got to go to Iraq, which was really cool. I did a magazine feature on energy extraction in northern Iraq and Kurdistan, which was really interesting. That was in 2014. I got in just in time before things started getting particularly bad in Iraq again. Then let's see. And then the other thing I want to talk about was fossil fuels and renewables. This is also part of the same story. BP, for example, is trying very hard now to rebrand as a big provider of alternative fuels because their specialty before was that risky exploration of oil, and now that market is in the doldrums. The problem with a lot of why we don't just only use renewable fuel is that they can't make enough of it, at least not yet, to keep the lights on everywhere. And it's also an issue that wind turbines and solar fields can have local environmental impacts that are also quite destructive. I mean, there's two sides to everything, and the only carbon neutral source of electricity that is available to us is nuclear, and that has a bad reputation because of 1 or 2 meltdowns, and it produces nuclear waste, which is a bit dangerous. So there's no obvious easy answers. It's complicated and it's a fascinating story to follow. Just a bit about Bloomberg. As I was saying, it caters to the investment banking industry, financial services. It started in 1980 when Mike Bloomberg was 40 years old, and he had been a bond trader in New York. His company got bought out, and they gave him a huge settlement. And so he decided that he would start his own company. And the company started as just a way to collate and organize bond prices quickly. The Newswire service started in 1990 when the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones decided that just this data that Mike Bloomberg's machine was giving was actually competing with the news that they had been providing for the machine, and so they pulled the plug on it, and that's when Mike started the Newswire. The cool thing about Bloomberg as a journalist is that it doesn't rely on journalism for its income. We basically sell a subscription to bankers or lawyers or executives. It's pretty expensive. It's about $20,000 a year, and the journalism side of it is just something there to keep it sticky and keep people glued to their screens. But it's also lots of information, lots of data. And as a news organization, though, we've become very big. I mean, we're 2,700 journalists now in 150 bureaus, 70 countries. I mean, that makes us one of the biggest news wires in the world. What it means from a newswire perspective, though, is that I'm often judged on how quickly I send headlines or get news out, by the second, compared with our competitors. The idea is that we want people to watch us when stuff happens, and if other people have things first and people are making or losing money on it, they'll go wherever the information is fastest. So a lot of that can be very high profile. It's not quite like working at a local newspaper where you have weeks to figure out what happened to the cat that got caught in the tree, type of thing. So what I like about my job, I like what I thought I would like. I like the writing, I like the traveling, I like meeting lots of interesting people. I like being paid to keep up with current events. Something I've always thought was enjoyable. I like some things I didn't expect to like. I really like the interviewing part of the job. I have to do that a lot, and I've learned a lot about myself and about human psychology, and getting better at doing interviews. It's also a great endeavor when you're trying to gain access to big organizations like BP or the Bank of England or the European Central Bank or whatever else. How to get people to tell you things that maybe they shouldn't as part of your job, but also build contacts, be plugged in. I didn't expect to enjoy that, but it's a huge challenge. I really like it. But it's also really cool to be close to levers of power, right? I mean, VP chief executives would know my name and send me emails to my personal address at the height of the Deepwater Horizon crisis and afterwards. Central bank governors know who I am at a press conference. BP took me to Wimbledon, I think 3 years. One year I sat right behind Beyonce and Jay-Z. And that was really cool. It was not that I was that close to that box, you see. It's just they had some seats in the box, but they didn't like the cameras on them all the time, so they'd sneak off into the back and come in and sit someplace else. Anyway, the other place they had tickets for was right in front of my seat that year, and it was really cool. There's some things, of course, that are annoying. There's long hours. You can spend a lot of time waiting for things to happen that are supposed to happen at any moment. I mean, it can be tedious. It is fast-paced and sometimes very high pressure. One of the things before COVID I used to have to do at least every 6 weeks, sometimes more, was go into the basement of the Bank of England 40 minutes before an interest rate decision or some major announcement, and they do what's called a lockup. I had to put my phone or any internet device in a separate room, go into a different one with special computers, and they would turn off the internet, and there'd be no outside communication. They'd give me the information, and I would have, say, 40 minutes to come up with a story and a bunch of headlines of everything that happened in that. And had to be good, obviously. It was kind of like, you know, taking a test. I kind of like that, but you know, it can certainly be stressful. Also, you know, the kind of journalism I do, the writing is not as creative as, you know, you might like. It's not formulaic. That's not right, but it has to be very precise, direct. But it is also, you know, it's also done by committee a lot because everyone has a stake in getting the story just right. Anyway, if you think of yourself as an artist, wire journalism might not be that rewarding for you. If you're interested in journalism and you want some advice on what you should do to become a journalist, I'm obliged by the journalist code to say, first, don't become a journalist. You shouldn't do it. But after that, I'd say I don't really mean that. You should absolutely become a journalist if you want to. It's a trade or a career that you really can learn by doing. I mean, it's nice to go to journalism school, but journalism school is just sort of a safe place to be doing all this stuff. You can do it in almost any type environment. The key is just to get a lot of stories with the name at the top. And then you're viable. If you have a specialty, like you speak a foreign language, or there's a topic that you happen to know a lot about, that can be helpful. But half the fun in journalism is learning very quickly about things you previously had no clue about. Problems in journalism in general. As an industry, we're still grappling with the internet as a problem, the idea that we can't sell ads in newspapers anymore. It's getting a bit better. You'll notice now most serious news organizations will have some sort of paywall, usually kind of cheap. So the idea is to get people to pay a little bit for good journalism now. That seems to be working. What else? See, it's a problem that there's a problem with credibility. How do we get around the idea that everything we write is fake news when anyone can just say anything that happens is not happening? There's a lot of conspiracy theorists and wackos, and they don't even have. I mean, they don't have to be right. They just have to create confusion. There's still a lingering problem in journalism about what I would call false impartiality. The idea that you have to be objective, tell both sides of every story. You kind of do, but it's often overdone. So such that you get a headline. The classic example is "Views differ on the shape of the Earth." It's not being a good journalist to present two sides as being equal in an argument when one side is overwhelmingly supported by experts and the other side is a little bit nuts, I would say. I know it also happens in with climate change. That was the famous one where the vast majority of scientists said climate change is man-made and it's happening and it's real, and one or two would say, well, we don't know about that, and they're presented as equal sides. There's less of an issue with that now, but you see it come up with new topics all the time. It's a problem that we have to rely on official sources. Too much of news is just the president said this without being able to analyze it that much, because we see our job as just reporting rather than evaluating the quality of information. And I mean, the biggest problem, I would say, is philosophical. It goes way back, and that's just that information and reason don't drive human behavior. We function on emotions. That's not a new insight particularly, but it really it really sunk in when I became a journalist. And if you think about the implications, it will make it hard to sleep at night. I mean, it means that you can show people definitively, what is true and what's not true, and they won't care. They'll believe the lie if it feels good. So as journalists, I feel we're going to have to come up with some way to make quality journalism feel good, even if it's a truth that people don't want to hear. The good news on that is that there's always been similar problems in journalism. It's something that goes back for centuries, and we've usually gotten through them. Bad news, I guess, is that a couple of those times were really close calls, and it went really horribly wrong. You think about Nazi Germany, or Stalinist Russia, all the places where the media was overtaken by other forces and wasn't a force for good necessarily. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. And I guess I can open it up to questions now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. I think this is so fascinating to get your perspective, and I had no idea you had done this kind of travel. It's really cool. So thank you for giving us so much insight into what you do and who you are. And I do see a question here from Brent.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Brian, and talking to us. It was really interesting to hear from you. I was just curious, as someone who didn't major in journalism either for undergrad or grad school, and I'm sorry if I missed this at the beginning of your talk, I was just curious where your interest in journalism stemmed from, and at what point you decided that was where you wanted to take your career. And then as a follow-up, I was just curious how you feel TAM may have helped you when you decided to follow that career path.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, I mean, I went to the University of Georgia, which has one of the best journalism schools in the country, and I didn't get close to the student newspaper or the broadcast school. I only thought seriously about going into journalism when I started TAM, and it wasn't necessarily TAM that made me think of it. It was just that I thought it'd be nice to go places and write about them. I think I had in mind I'd be more of like a travel writer at first. That seemed like a pretty fun thing to do. But just as I learned more and did more stuff, I got interested in financial journalism because that's where the jobs were, basically. And I think probably when I started, I thought, well, I can do this for a few years until I get really established, and then I can go off and do other things. But I just got totally absorbed in it in the end. I mean, TAM was actually really helpful. This might sound like hard medicine, but John Stevenson's class, I use the stuff we did in that every day about European welfare states, how we compare with different stuff. That class is basically the background for how that meta story for how welfare states work in European countries and how they fit together, and how it provides a template for how each country is going to face different problems that come up. But I mean, I did other stuff as well. I did so when I was in Paris, I did stuff about the privatization of railways, and looking into the corporatist structure of things in Europe as compared to in the States. And in Germany, I did my thesis on newspaper coverage in the U.S. and Germany after September 11th, and I sort of tailored my TAM curriculum to help me in journalism, and that I ended up being like something a project you would do in journalism school. Basically, ended up showing how German sources relied less on officials for their news, how they would print opinions close to hard news stuff, and that didn't bother them, and that the U.S. sources were more credulous of officials, and that went some way to explaining how Germany and the US, who had been historically allies on almost everything in foreign policy, had gotten so far apart when it came to Iraq. So that's, I mean, that was a way that I just sort of made it go that way. Yeah, journalism is something that you can really, I mean, go to journalism school if you can. You'll learn a lot, and it will help you. But it's also something you can just go learn by doing. It helped me a lot to be one of a small handful of people in Berlin who could go out and report stories in German and write about them well in English from Berlin. You know, if I tried to start my career in New York, I'd be up against Columbia J School grads and people that have worked at every newspaper everywhere for 6 weeks and who have, you know, parents who work, you know, in well-connected places, and it would have been much harder for me. So I was very lucky in that regard that I could get my foot in the door in Berlin, and you know, that helped. TAM was the way I got there. So that was one big way that TAM really helped me in my career.
Thank you. So I had a question about what was your feeling about that Bloomberg 2020 campaign?
Oh, yeah. Horrifying. Pure horror. Read The Heart of Darkness? Yeah, it's absolute horror. Yeah, I know this is recorded and it's on the record, and as a journalist, I'm not going to say anything bad about my boss, but it made it very hard to be a journalist.
Well, we could stop recording if you want right now.
No. I don't really have anything interesting to say about it. It was made it very hard for us as an organization because we wouldn't be reporting on Bloomberg, or I think he said any of the Democratic candidates, but we would investigate others. Like it meant that, you know, it meant there was no way Bloomberg, which has more resources than most any other organization, was never ever going to investigate Mike Bloomberg if there was something fishy on his record, and that's a huge problem for your credibility as a serious organization. Thank God that only lasted about 2 weeks, and then he decided he could spend his money elsewhere. That's beside, you know, aside from the fact that I thought that the billions he spent on his presidential campaign could have been well invested in bonuses for his employees. That was it. Now, I mean, but Mike knew that as well. He didn't want to do that. He didn't want to. He actually didn't. You know, he was of two minds. He said in a memo, well, let's look. I don't want my own organization to write bad stories about me, but I also don't want to ruin my own organization and take away, you know, their credibility. So it's certainly something he's aware of. Another big problem in journalism, I would say, is that they can be, you know, that is controlled by billionaires. It's not just Mike. We've got, you know, Jeff Bezos owning the Washington Post. You know, yeah, it's, you can, I mean, it's not a problem right now in terms of agendas, but you can see how it could be very quickly if things started to turn.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. So Katie Lindner's here. She says I can read her question for her. She says, thanks for talking with us today. What does your typical workday look like?
So pre-COVID or post-COVID? We'll do post. It's not that different, actually. I've been very lucky in that I can do most of what I do at home. So about 2 days a week, maybe I'll have to start with a data release at 7 a.m. Say the unemployment numbers coming out, they will drop for us, and I'll have to do a story quickly on that. And then once the initial news comes out, market opens at 8 in London. I think it's 9:30 in New York, but it's we stay on European hours most of the time. Get all the news out before the market opens. Then you usually have an organizational meeting in the morning. And then you'll deal with 1 or 2 speeches by central bankers. We watch those very closely in case they say what they're going to do with interest rates. That's what people are interested in. And in between all that, you're working on your big feature stories like how Brexit is affecting jobs for people in the north of England after they voted for it. Are they getting help? Are things better? Are they getting worse? Stuff like that. Yeah. So you're doing all that at once, and it can vary a lot from day to day.
Great. And now we have a question from Joseph.
Yeah, after you mentioned one time having to go to a conference in Mexico City, it brought to my mind, just as a point of curiosity, what do journalists try and do at these big conferences with lots of world leaders or elite business people, and what do they try and learn, and how exactly? Because it seems like the people attending these things would try and keep the actual substantive discussions close to their chest. But I was just curious about hearing some about all that.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Yeah, so we hang out in hotel lobbies, wait for them to come in or out, try and be nice to them, get stories out of them, ideally by getting them drunk. But, sometimes you just have to be charming, and hope for the best. There's usually a couple of briefings. You can see the main events going on usually, and those are usually worth reporting as well. This is the thing I like that I didn't expect to like about journalism, just being close to, the levers of power. I was doing this once in Basel, Switzerland, and it was 6 a.m, and I did an interview with Alan Greenspan as he was getting out of Brexit. Out of breakfast. Brexit and breakfast, it's the same. But it's just kind of surreal when you realize what's going on with that. It's a tricky thing. It's one of the fun things about journalism. It's about building sources, getting people to trust you. If you hang out in enough hotel lobbies, they'll start to recognize you, and if they like you, will sometimes give you stuff for nothing. You don't have to work for it. It's great. But other times you have to buy a lot of beers.
Excellent. All right. Well, Brent had something, but we're going to skip him since he asked a question and circle back to you and go to Brittany next.
Hey, Brian. Thank you for being here today. I've really enjoyed hearing you talk about your job as a journalist, because I'm studying journalism and I'm graduating in May, hopefully, and currently looking for jobs and internships in journalism. And I'm just really kind of discouraged right now, because it just seems like people are losing their jobs in journalism, and COVID has just made it harder to look for jobs. And Bloomberg is actually one of the news organizations that I want to apply to work for. So I was wondering if you have any tips on how to be a strong candidate, especially in a more competitive market. I missed the beginning of the lecture, so I'm not really sure how you got into your job at Bloomberg from being a TAM student. But yeah, I was just looking for advice that you would give to a grad.
It's a really good question, and it's not easy. I was very lucky because I was in Berlin, and I basically just begged people at the bureau chief at Reuters. I begged to let me come in and work for free. I managed to meet the NPR had a correspondent there who I begged to let me come help her out with translations 1 day a week, and learn stuff like that. But I didn't have anywhere close to the qualifications to ever get an internship at Bloomberg. I train the interns now that come through London, and their resumes are just mind blowing. They've done lots of interesting stuff and graduated top of their class and all that. They look great, and that's how they got. I think our acceptance rate on internships is maybe 10%. Don't be discouraged if you don't get in the first time. That's not always the secret to getting your foot in the door, and not even all of our interns get jobs afterwards. So it is very competitive. You have to be patient. You have to be persistent. The way you set yourself apart, the hardest thing in journalism, possibly in any job, I'm not sure, certainly any creative job, is ideas. If you can pitch yourself as the person who will always come up with good ideas for stories, your superiors will love you, because that's what they need. Pretty much all the rest you can learn in a standard way. You can learn how to do news writing. You can learn how to do reporting, learn how to do interviews. But anybody can do a lot of that stuff. But people will always need more ideas, more things to put down on the page. The other thing to keep in mind, if you really enjoy writing, remember that most people, and this goes even for the really hotshot interns that I work with in London, a lot of them don't really write well. It's too hard to make simple sentences and make yourself understood clearly on a page. It's something that not everyone can do. Keep that close to your heart and be true to yourself. If you like writing and you're good at it, it will shine through. So ideas, and if you love it, you'll eventually come up with it. And then just the other thing I would really emphasize is that people want to help. Don't ever be afraid to ask someone for, to meet for coffee. I mean, maybe not during COVID, but if you find someone at even a student newspaper in Chapel Hill who does something that is interesting at a local level, or works at a TV station, and say, look, I'm really interested in what you do. Can we talk about it? They probably will do it. You'd be surprised. Everybody wants to help. It's because everyone's been there. Everyone starts somewhere. I hope that helps. I wish you good luck. It won't be easy, but it is worth it if you can break through.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I know that you've had coffee meetings with some of the TAM folks over the years, and we really appreciate that. And I'm thinking specifically of Isha. I think you met with her, and now she works at Voice of America. So it really leads places, and that help means a lot. Matilda has a question now.
Yeah, so you talked a bit about how journalists often just rely on information from official sources without maybe analyzing it too much. So I was just wondering if you've done more investigative journalism, and if so, is there any story that you're especially proud of?
Yeah, good question. I mean, not enough. So it's the tricky thing in journalism. You've got to get access to whatever it is you're trying to cover, right? So you've got to make friends in hotel lobbies with the people coming and going that you'll see over and over again, so they'll talk to you. But eventually, to get if there's a underlying story or issue you're trying to get at, you might have to, you're talking to several different people, and you put that together, and then maybe it doesn't end up looking great for the company or the central bank or whatever. So I mean, my best scoops like that of an investigative nature were, I mean, at the Bank of England 10 years ago during the financial crisis. I got people to tell me what was going on in the meetings they were having and how some people felt shut out by it. And that was a little bit embarrassing for the company. What else? I mean, I haven't done big investigative things. I've done sort of magazine pieces. That was the thing I went to Iraq for, which was fascinating. That was the oil industry in northern Iraq. The oil is a bit harder to get to, but they also want, they're constantly afraid that they will declare independence from Iraq because they're Kurds, and then the southern Iraq there, and they're Sunnis. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for you, I'm afraid. I haven't done a cool investigative thing. I have read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I thought the fictional work they did in The Dragon Tattoo was fascinating and really good, but I haven't actually achieved anything like that in real life yet. Sorry. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so Peter has the next question.
Hi. Thank you for your perspective and insights. I wonder how you manage to stay on point in your reporting and keep the reader interested. Any tips?
Make it short. That's the best one. You've got to. I mean, I said briefly that it gets annoying that some of our stories are written by committee. Sorry, it's getting dark in London. I've only got a small window. But basically, we'll go through every paragraph as a group, as an editor, writer, maybe senior editors or executives, even executive editors, making sure that at each paragraph we never give the reader an excuse to stop reading. We analyze it down to the last period. How can we keep people tuned into that? Most people, even especially journalists, don't read a whole news story, right? If you think they read the first 2-3 paragraphs tops. We know that very well. So we try very hard to put all the stuff right at the top. That's one way that news writing is going to be different from creative writing or doing a book or even a paper for TAM. There's no reward for making a big surprise point at the end of a news story. You get everything out right at the top.
Interesting. Okay, so we're going to go back to Brent now.
Thanks. Yeah, just one more question. This is more of an economics question that I'm curious about, because I remember reading some articles in the early weeks of the pandemic that were sort of like sounding the alarm on CLOs, which obviously are pretty much the same thing as CDOs that played such a big role in the housing market crisis, but I haven't read anything about those in months or really heard about them. So I was just wondering if that's something that has come up at all in your economics reporting.
Not so much. I mean, investment bankers will always try and find new ways to generate fees, and that's what more securitizations like that are really all about. The good news is that regulators learned an awful lot in the financial crisis, and they're wise to it, much more so than they were before. If you've seen The Big Short, it was absolutely true and absolutely the case, as they showed in the movie, that people didn't know who owed who money what when they signed all these complex contracts and divvied everything up, like in a CDO, and it was so extreme that people didn't know who was on the hook if these loans went sour and stopped performing. They didn't know what. So it made it all the worse when things did start to go bad, and it turns out everybody was in trouble. But that was one huge source of confusion. But I would, like I said, regulators are a lot wiser than they were. One thing that financial regulators are good at, maybe other people too, is they're really great at fighting the last war, making sure that that whatever bad happened in the past doesn't happen in quite the same way again. But yeah, new bad things will always happen. That's always the trick.
Super. So what's going to happen over here with the election? What are you hearing? Because, when you're inside things, you can't see them like when you're outside things.
Well, I would ask you the same question. I don't know. I wouldn't deign to predict. I can read the polls as well as anyone else. But everyone in Europe just sort of watches with fascination and usually some level of disgust as well, every political event happening in the States. And I don't know if it's better to be up close to it, like you are in the States, or a little bit further away. Yeah, I wouldn't pretend to know what it could all mean.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing that in the last 2 days for early voting throughout our state, the lines have been long. So that's very heartening because, I mean, no matter what people are doing with their vote, they're at least using it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but that's all I can tell.
Same in Georgia as well. Certainly the case in Atlanta. They have very, very long lines.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've heard the theory that everyone in the world should be able to vote for the U.S. president because it affects everyone, right?
Yes.
That's certainly what people here tell me, that, you know, when I get my absentee ballot, I have to show it to everyone, say, this is what it's like. This will probably be counted by some authority in the States. It's always very exciting.
Yeah, other TAM grads who are living overseas are saying the same thing,
Mm.
who are American. Yeah, true. Are there any other questions that you have for Brian? Well, thank you so much for giving us this time on your Friday evening in London, and yeah, for just revealing so much about what you do and who you are. We really appreciate it, and thank you for all your engagement with TAM over the years. It's exciting because you started the program 20 years ago.
I know. Seems like yesterday, kind of. No, it reminds me actually that I was in a TAM lecture when September 11th happened. That's how long ago it was.
Wow.
Yeah, one way to easily remember where you were when something happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to hear you talking about John Stevens' class that these kids are taking, you know, it's really incredible after so much time, and what it means to you today.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much again, and everyone have a wonderful weekend.
Mm-hmm.